Hello, security people. As you can see, it's just myself. Renee Smalls isn't here today, but welcome to Breaking into Cybersecurity. Today we have Jim Rabuck, who has a very interesting, did I pronounce that right? Rabuck. Sorry about that.
Raybuck, Jim Buck, as we
Jim
said,
Buck.
like
Who has a very interesting story. Coming from the military and transitioning over, and I really wanted everyone to hear this. It's kind of a cybersecurity entrepreneur story. It's a little bit of everything, and so let's jump right in. Jim?
thanks, Chris. So a little bit about me is, so previously to joining Checkpoint Software in January 2018, I'd spent 6 years active duty as an infantry officer, and then I became a reconnaissance officer for a few years, and then I had the bright idea of jumping out of a really secure job as an infantry officer to trying to start a startup. Terrible idea if you don't know anything about business, but through that, I found cybersecurity was very complementary to a military background. There's a lot of adversaries out there. You have to play nice with adjacent partners. So obviously, Checkpoint is in a field that has thousands of vendors that are out there, and firewalls is a pretty saturated space now. So you have to play nice with everybody. So I felt like cybersecurity was the right way to move forward. So that's an abbreviated version of how I ended up in cyber.
So tell me about life as a reconnaissance officer. How do you think for those in the military in a similar role, how those skills translate to preparing you for your cybersecurity career?
Yeah. So I'm obviously, so most people out there, my current role is I help secure startups. So I go and find interesting startups in Austin area, and we try to onboard them onto our cloud security platform. Now, the way that ties into my military background as a reconnaissance officer and infantry officer is I don't consider myself a sales guy. From the military, it started off as a service-oriented background, and in the military, you become heavily oriented towards project management. It's what's the goal, what's the mission, what are your key tasks, what is the enemy situation, what is your friendly situation, what intelligence do you have, what is the commander's intent, and you bring all these down and you boil it into a project or a mission that you have to execute against. And where that plays into cybersecurity is now, for most of you who don't have a military background, all missions are planned off of a 5-paragraph operation order. First is situation. That situation consists of, give me, what is the environment? What is the context? Provide details about what's going on. So in cybersecurity, what that is my first discussion with most customers is that, hey, have you heard about Checkpoint? It's more, tell me about you. What are you guys doing? Provide the context for your business. Tell me what you're trying to achieve. Because ultimately, as I can gather that information and understand the field that you're playing in, and the risk that's involved with your business, then it makes it much easier to have a flowing conversation. And then as we progress down this 5-paragraph op order, you have your situation, and then that plays into the mission. And the mission comes forward, and ultimately, what is the mission for this organization, or what are they trying to achieve, and what are the key tasks that are associated with that? And then the 3rd paragraph is execution. All right, how are we going to achieve this in a step-by-step role? Plan, execute, and then lastly, how do we quantify that this was successful? So taking that military background and then specifically reconnaissance, where you're assessing where an enemy's location is, or who a high-value target is, or even where your friendlies are, you're gathering intelligence at all times. Your goal is to say, Mr. Commander, Mr. Boss, whoever is the primary decision maker, what information do you need to make the right decision. So it's not necessarily what you observe, but it's what you're observing as the right information. And then how do you pass it up in a effective way? So with all that tied in with the military reconnaissance background, it's really focused heavily on gathering that intelligence, effectively collecting it, and making it valuable to who you're passing it off to. It's ultimately that information has to be valuable. If it isn't, it doesn't really matter.
Wow, just thinking about that framework, that could be used from everything from sales to how you're going to tackle an incident response situation to so many different areas within the cybersecurity industry that it really does make you that much more versatile.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, there's people out there that I'll go and discuss this with, where it's not only it's very much that OODA loop idea where you have a jet fighter and it's observe, orient, and rinse and repeat, right? It's a scientific method of observation and execute. And that's one of the things the military does really well is they execute with 70% plan, while most of us want to execute at 99% plan. So it's definitely helpful. It gets you moving.
Yeah. Perfection is the enemy of progress.
That's a great quote.
So as you transitioned out of the military, talk to me about how you got to Checkpoint? How did that happen? Like, what was your journey along the way?
I would love to tell you that it's a thrilling, exciting story that's filled with a ton of like serendipitous moments. But to be honest, it was the course was, so I came back from deployment in 2014. I was in Kosovo, which, if you didn't know, we still have soldiers there. Yes, there's still a big brigade there. But I came back and had this idea to start a company. And as I began to understand business and what that looked like, there are, as I take a step back, there are thousands of programs out there for military as they transition out of the military. You have project management. You can go to school. You can start a business. And then specifically, I chose a program called Hiring Our Heroes, which is a program that's designed to help veterans transition into the corporate world. So I chose this organization. It's called Bunker Labs. If you haven't heard of it, go check it out. Especially if you're a military vet, it's an organization, great community for anybody who's entrepreneurial. Doesn't matter what you do. It's a great resource for you as you're getting out. But that's where kind of I branched out into this tech field, because I was an idiot when it came down to tech. I just didn't know a whole lot. I didn't know what a VPN was. I didn't know what a firewall was, to be honest. I didn't even know the difference between like what Linux was versus JavaScript. But as I'm transitioning out of the military, I found a program that helped transition veterans into cybersecurity, and that program is called TechVault. I knew it, so you always have to choose what skill set you're good at. And as much as I would love to be a fantastic developer or be a fantastic creator of code, it's just I'm not good at it. But I am good at project management, and I'm good at understanding and moving projects forward, and sales kind of felt like it was a good opportunity for that. Even though when I used to think of a car salesman, I was like, I don't want to be a sales guy, especially coming out of the military. I'm like, I don't want to go do sales. Like, this is man. I would hate it. I hated getting called by sales folks, but then all of a sudden I was like, this is actually, if you care about it, it can be a really impactful and fulfilling job. So come to TechVault, go through the program, and I go through it, and I'm looking at all these other businesses that I can join. Like, you have cybersecurity companies, you have various like networking companies that are out there, and I kept on getting called by companies that I won't name, but I just wasn't interested in working at them because I felt like I needed purpose. I wanted to have purpose, and I felt like cybersecurity, there is clear purpose behind what you do. So Checkpoint gave me a call. in November of 2017 and said, "Hey, we want to bring you on, and we're going to throw you into global account manager right off the bat." And I was like, "Oh man, all right, let's do this." I was like, "I don't know anything about business, but I'll work my butt off to make it work." So came in, started working with one of the largest companies in the world, managing the checkpoint infrastructure there. And man, that was a trial by fire. It was a lot of drinking water through a fire hose, but I loved it. I didn't sell a thing for 6 months. The only thing I did is listen to people, and that's where I think that it really helped me out, is just listening and understanding. Kind of sales is a lot less about projecting what I want onto you. It's more me listening to say, what can I do to help?
Observe and orient.
Yeah.
Well, some of those links, if you had those for military vets that might be listening, because we'll definitely shout them out. Feel free to post them in the chat window. But so talk me through drinking from the fire hose. What are some of the tactics, techniques, procedures that you use to get yourself up to speed to feel that you can make an impact in the clients that you're delivering, in accomplishing your mission? Talk me through that process.
So obviously I'm speaking mostly to folks who are coming out of the military, getting their first job in cybersecurity. But I also think that this applies to anybody in the profession. Is if you're a professional, the whole idea of being a professional in any industry is growth. What are you doing to grow as a professional? Like if it's a job, then you don't really care about learning. But in my opinion, if you're a professional in something, you have to grow. And first and foremost, drinking from a fire hose. Thank the Lord, I had a fantastic SE. He was a teacher first, and I would say, if out of anything, if you are a salesperson and you're coming in, or you're an SE and you have a dumb sales guy like me coming in that doesn't know anything about security, get the guys hands on. You're not gonna get a guy to go provision a firewall. Go get him to set up some firewall rules. Get them to understand networking, and that's really where it started for me. It wasn't me talking about, "Hey, have you heard about this fantastic checkpoint product that I know nothing about? I don't know what this port is, and I don't know what's securing, but why don't you buy it from me?" Versus, "All right, hey, come set up a lab in my room. I want to know how to do this. I want to understand how to provision a virtual firewall. I want to understand what a CASB is. I want to understand what URL filtering is to like a consolidated management framework." And that's what it is it's ultimately, if I was going to put a framework down for your listeners, it's learn first, create a plan, understand the foundation of networking and security first. That's the first and foremost thing you can do. And you can go to Coursera to do that. You can do that on Udemy. There's free resources out there that you can go and learn this stuff. Once you do that, then go talk about technology and your technology once you understand it. And put a plan for it. Don't just go out and do it arbitrarily. Set a goal, set a date, put some key tasks behind it, and set no later than this date, I will know how to set up a firewall. I will know how to set up a virtual firewall. So that's what I would recommend to anybody who's going in for my position.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like mentorship from your sales engineer, SE, as you mentioned, was very critical for you. From yourself, outside of the hands-on experience that he put you through, you mentioned Coursera and the self-study. What was your process in figuring out what you needed to learn to be successful in your role?
So the military is kind of a funny place, right? If you aren't familiar with the military, the way that it's set up is you have an officer, you have a 22-year-old young man, very young man, comes in, and now he's in charge of 40 soldiers. And those soldiers range from the age of 18 from a private to his platoon sergeant who might have been in the Army for up to 20 years. So you could be working with like somebody who's been in the military for up to 20 years and you're brand new, right? So, and this is also if you know Tim Ferriss, he also speaks of this. He talks about instead of going out and trying to navigate waters on your own, it's go ask the questions. Go ask your SE. And as an infantry officer, as I joined the military, I went straight to a platoon sergeant. I said, what do we need to do to be successful here? I want you're the backbone of the military. Like, and that's a really good analogy for cybersecurity as well, is the backbone of the military is the NCO. You go speak to any general officer in the Army, and you say, the NCOs are our backbone. This is who they are. This is what they do. Without the NCOs, this won't work. And it's the truth. And the truth is about cybersecurity or a vendor is that without the SEs, the sales engineers, are the backbones of any vendor. If you do not have their endorsement and you don't ask their opinion on things, I don't think that as a sales team you'll be effective. Unless you have like the most amazing technology that's like, as we say, like changing the entire industry or disrupting everything. But that's my opinion on it. Like, it is going, there's only one step that's required, is going and asking somebody who's been there what they've done and what they recommend. Because then they can tell you the rest. They can tell you steps 2 through 20. Mm-hmm. That very first step is to go to them.
And so now that you're in the role, how do you keep up with the ever-changing industry? What do you do to keep yourself at the top of the game? Do you go to conferences? Do you continued self-learning? What's your process there?
Yeah, so so this is what actually you and I connected on. I don't know if you remember this, but I was like, man, I want to continue learning about this industry, and so I put together. Have you ever listened to Morning Brew, Chris?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay, if you don't follow Morning Brew's newsletter, sign up for it. It's fantastic. It's really incredible. It covers just general topics, but essentially what I did is I tried to go recreate this newsletter that followed the similar path, mm-hmm. where it's what are the new companies that are getting invested in? So your Series A through C companies that get funding, who's been acquired, and then what technologies are coming out. So mm-hmm. I signed up for an alert on Google. So I get a Google alert every day on who's been acquired, who's been funded, and then I go to index.co, and I go and research on a daily basis any news of what vendors are doing. Because in the cybersecurity space, like if you're a small company, the way to win is to partner. You got to partner with everybody because you can't do everything. So you got to get your point solution to fit in somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I go and research each one of those spots, and then I collect it, and then I type up the newsletter, and it seems to work. I don't know everything, but mm-hmm. That's at least what I try to do.
So that sounds like, is that for who you're targeting for startups to reach out to, or is that also for gaining recon on additional technologies, how they work, how they function, so that you can better talk to the evolving environment?
So there's a couple of reasons why I do it. So one, it garners social proof. It's like, if you produce something, and this is why anybody does a podcast, this is why people write a book, it provides social proof. It says, this guy is researching, he's going and understanding the marketplace. I know my job isn't, my lane in cybersecurity isn't to be the guy who can perfectly go figure out how the next generation firewall is going to work out. Mm-hmm. My job is to better understand the landscape of what technologies are out there and where we fit in best. And with that is, by developing a newsletter or a podcast, you build out this social proof that says, hey, this guy has researched this. He's spending time understanding that. And then the second part of why I do that is when I feel like I don't want to do it, it's kind of telling me that I am losing interest in cybersecurity, or that maybe I'm just not maybe I'm losing the prioritization of understanding my lane. Mm-hmm. So those are the two main ones. And then lastly, it's fun because I'll send out an email that has this on it, and I get an email back from random people out there that are like, "Man, this is the best newsletter I've seen. Like, this is fantastic." I'm like, "All right, that's great." And then sometimes people are like, "I don't know how I signed up for this. Please get me off." Da, 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 da. And then they yell at me, and I'm like, "I'm very sorry. I will remove you from the list." So it does have its twofold, but I do enjoy it, and it helps me stay abreast of what's going on in the industry.
So one of the things I know Renee and I talk about all the time is that there's so many different supporting careers under the cybersecurity umbrella, sales being one of them. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ways you think that outside of that other military individuals can consider outside of sales that you've seen would be a great fit for them within the cybersecurity industry?
That's a great question. And I think as you look at the security industry, and as I'm very young in it, I've 2 years now, is my understanding is you have this saturated marketplace, right? So you have vendor, everywhere's a vendor. You go to RSA and people are like throwing things at you, literally throwing things out there. You're like, "Hey, let me throw this checkpoint thing at your face, and maybe you'll buy a firewall for me in 10 years. But if something that's really fascinating to me is, and Jack will probably really appreciate this, Jack Jones. So here's a funny story for you. I go to RSA, my first RSA in 2018. I'm in San Francisco, been at Checkpoint for all of 2 months, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm taking a couple customers. I'm like, I don't know what the heck any of this stuff is, but let's shoot for it. But I come out of conference and I walk out to the Chipotle out of one of those big old buildings, those conference centers. And I walk in and there's this guy behind me in an Indiana Jones hat. I'm like, mm-hmm. This guy he looks pretty interesting, right? So I was like, "Hey, are you by yourself?" And he responds, "Yes, I'm by myself." I was like, "Well, let me buy your burrito. Let me buy your burrito. Let's go sit down." And it ends up being one of the keynote speakers at this event, and it's the CEO. His name is Jack Jones, and Jack is the CEO of a company called RiskLens. And RiskLens does a quantitative study or analysis of risk. Mm-hmm. So I think it's and the reason why I tell that story is because most people begin to think of it's always like throw the vendor solution at it, go fix it with hardware, as opposed to addressing it from a business issue, saying, okay, our business, what risk are we willing to assume with this specific project? So mm-hmm. You might have a breakout location and it's going to cost you $20 million to secure all these breakout locations, but the risk of if it's infected is, or if it's like hacked, maybe it's only $500,000, maybe it's $200,000, and the idea is you start measuring that risk to reward to what needs to be secured, what doesn't, and his company is addressing that through, I assume, probably regression. I'm in my MBA right now at Rice, so I'm learning about mm-hmm. data analytics. So I'm all about this right now. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a really fascinating career to get into, is more on the side of, as data analytics is on the rise and being a data scientist, that analytics portion into assessing the risk that a company can take on and then how it applies to what kind of vendor you should use. It's a really fascinating career. I would, and that's more like a professional services, almost a risk consultant type role, mm-hmm. which I think it is a very interesting space to go into if you're not a traditional cybersecurity expert, but you're interested in the data analytics between cybersecurity and business. So
there's a really good book called How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity. That the author previously did another book, How to Measure Anything in risk management, but he transitioned it to cybersecurity. But it's a really good book that dives into some of the false ways that our industry has been measuring risk or trying to quantify what what problem you're trying to solve and how much risk it poses to the organization. And it's a really good read for you to really analyze what risk you're measuring. And like you mentioned, I talk a lot about resiliency. And in order for an organization to be resilient, you have to start with that resiliency from the business mission level, work down through your people and process. And then once you've ironed those out, then you can use technology to fill in any of the remaining gaps, as well as other things you can do after that. But if you try with the technology way first, it's not going to work. And an analogy I used the other day was, if you go with a technology first approach, you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. If you get the peg to fit, there's still going to be gaps around it. And that's exactly what you end up with if you try to take a technology first approach. And all too often individuals try to do that.
So I went through this program. Now that you're talking a little bit about frameworks and processes, so one of the things that I did as I was coming out of the military, there's another program that if you're military, you should go check out. It's Stanford Ignite. I did it in 2016, and the idea is it's a business school wrapped up into 4 weeks. They toss you in, you go and learn from all of the professors. Literally, the guy who wrote the book on financial accounting is one of the professors there that teaches you how to do a P&L and all that kind of stuff. But I go there, and I spoke there probably a month ago now. And what we did is we went over all the programs that people can use as they transition out of the military to get into business, go to business school. But one of the guys, I met a really interesting gentleman there. His name is William Young. And William, he was tasked with building out a framework for how the Air Force addresses cybersecurity at the very beginning of the development of applications. Because like the military has applications that very few people use, right? You have fighter pilots. There's how many fighter pilots in the world? I don't know. Like in the United States, I'd say maybe a few thousand. But there's very few people, but you're building these applications, and these applications have an inherent risk with them. So I met with William, we had a conversation, and we started talking about this idea of how he's been developing this framework where he assesses risk from the very beginning of the development cycle and measures it in some sort of regression analysis. He has a bunch of components that he throws into it, but assesses it on a certain level. He's a guy that I will definitely plug him in with you. He's a guy that I think that would have a fantastic conversation with you on the idea of framework development and understanding before you ever even discuss a vendor, what framework are you using? What are the processes that are built into this? Because without that, people and processes, the vendors are never going to be successful.
Exactly.
Or not the vendors, I should say, the businesses aren't going to be successful with the vendors that they put in place.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the bottom of the hour, and the last question I typically ask all of our guests: if you had one piece of advice to share with someone following in your footsteps, what would that be?
That's a very good question. If they're following my footsteps, it's be eager to learn. Don't discount a coffee or a lunch with somebody just because they might not be exactly who you want to meet. Be eager to learn and understand the field or the direction that you want to go. Because if you understand where you want to be 10 to 15 years from now, it's much easier to shape what kind of programs that you want to do. Because for me, I was far more ADD when I pursued this. I was like, I'm going to be a business owner. Now I'm going to be a product owner. Now I'm going to be a sales guy. And while I branched out and I've learned a lot in the various pieces, it would really boil down to understand, like really look forward and say, what do you want to accomplish in this lifetime we have. It's a short period, because that'll help shape what you want to do, especially in the security field. Because an SE is very different than a salesperson. Salesperson is very different than a product person. The product person is very different than a marketing person. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. And I know typically when individuals come to me for coaching, the first question I ask them is, what do you want to do, say, in 5 years? And then let's start planning backwards to get you there. But thank you very much. We're going to close out this session. Jim, if you have a chance, you can type in all the links for the things that you've mentioned along the way for resources. And then those that are on demand, they would be able to come back and see those links and get access to those resources as well.
Right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say I can add the link right now to this massive list that I have for you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and have a great day. And security people, until next time, talk to you then.
Thanks again, Chris.